Wanted to take a moment to say, anytime you start working with power tools, remember safety first. Eye protection, ear protection, and breathing protection when necessary are vital to keeping you safe. Join me as I start learning how to work with wood. I'm not an expert, I'm just a guy trying to share what I'm learning as I'm going through this project. I welcome your feedback and comments below of things I've done wrong or things I can do better. I really look forward to getting feedback on this video, and I hope you enjoy the little bit of change of pace. From here on out, this is completely smooth and ready to take our stain. So for this part of the process, we're using mid-wax water-based wood stain. That's our color. It's Island Water. So to apply the stain, we're going to have our stain. I have some more brushes that we're going to use. And all I'm going to do, just like with the pre-finish, is just brush it on, hit the edges, make sure to get the excess. When the time is right, once we've gotten to a certain point, we'll take another standard rag to wipe all the excess off. We're going to replace our little finishing cones. And the value of these is they let me do both sides of the workpiece without having to wait for one side to dry. We're going to start with the faces of these things facing down. It's a little hard to tell, but these are the backs. And the reason for that is when it's drying, if there are going to be little marks left by the cones, I'd rather them be on the back than the front. I'm going to use a 1-inch brush for our edges. I'm going to use one of these wider brushes, which I think is, I'm going to use one of these 3-inch brushes to actually put the majority of the stain on. This is something that we're going to want to open. We're going to want to stir it, not shake it, because we don't want any bubbles getting in our finish. Now, I also want to make sure that I wear gloves for this part, simply because I'm going to have to touch these workpieces to flip them over. Go ahead and open this, which actually hasn't been opened in a while. We want to make sure not to get any of this drip in the opening on the workpiece. And stir nice and slow. Now, even though this is water-based, the stain is much thicker than the pre-treatment and the poly finish. I'm going to just drop this straight into our water. And now we're going to take our 3-inch brush, dip it in the color on the edges, catch the drips, and now we're just going to start applying. Now remember, for this, we just want material down. We don't have to worry about how the grain is or anything. We just want to get it covered. That's the most important part of this step in the process, and we want to get it on fast. Now, what I have learned is my basement apparently, even with my dehumidifier running, is a little more humid than I would have expected, based on how long it took that pre-treat to kind of become workable. So the good news is, I think I get a little bit of extra time, but that's the trade-off for working with a water-based finish, is it dries faster. So it may not be the best for large work pieces. And this stuff is already drying on me. Some places where I put it on thin, you can tell. So it's going to add a little more material, or excuse me, a little more stain. And while I'm at it, not even using the 1-inch brush, this is working pretty good. That I'm going ahead and just doing the sides up while I've got this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do one side at a time, as far as we're going to apply the stain. Now let the stain sit and soak in just a little bit, and then we will wipe off the excess before flipping it over and doing that whole process again. See, we'll go ahead and just wipe it to get a rough idea of how well that took. Now my other pieces, I only did a single coat, and that's probably all I'm going to do this time. We'll see though. You can clearly tell where I've wiped and where I haven't. And I'm still worried about this top piece. When you wipe it, you want to wipe with the grain. When you apply it, doesn't matter as much. But when you're wiping it like this, go with the grain. The edges are a place where this stain will accumulate if you're not careful. So you got to make sure that you're attentive to that. Make sure we wipe all the excess off. on the corners, on the sides especially. Now you'll see, with the exception of a couple places, and of course I don't know how much of this is still due to me not doing a good job rubbing it out, but other than there, maybe a little bit up here, this wasn't too splotchy. Okay, go ahead and dip. That's good. And start applying. Again, I've done this using the staining pads. I've done it with rags. These foam brushes really make light work of this activity. And then now, time to start rubbing the stain off. Now up here, it's actually a little sticky, which means I may have waited just a tad bit too long to start taking it off. And you'll see where it sat longer, it gets darker. Of course, now the question is do we do a second coat or not? And I'm kind of inclined not to, because like I said, this right now matches the finish of the rest of the furniture pretty closely, because I only did one coat on it. Time to pick it up by the corners. You don't want stain that's on your gloves getting anywhere. And we flip it over. Again, by the corners. See, a little material gets actually on the corners. And that, unfortunately, I dab just a little bit of water on it, which might help. Now, though, time to apply our stain to the fronts. Put it on relatively thick. You know, this is a dry brush down here. Don't want it like that at all. You want, since you're removing the stain, you want a lot, well, not a lot. You want sufficient liquid to soak in. Okay, that's starting to dry up and get a little tacky. Down to our last two clean cloths. See, in cheap wood like this, I'll do an experiment. Paying attention to this spot here. Obviously, we'd like that to absorb some more color, but if the grain is packed, and I don't even know if that's the right word, but the grain's only going to accept so much fluid. So it's entirely possible I could do that 20 times and it not get any darker. So we'll stick a little on there. Let it sit up just a little bit. So the other thing is you don't want the spot that's bigger than that to do it. But you see, it doesn't really make a difference. And if anything, that kind of hurts the wood around it because it offers more stain material to spread when you rub it down. So some of these spots, even though this is a drawer face, I just have to live with the fact that's what it's going to look like. Take our last clean rag. Start from here, again working with the grain. All right, there we go. There's our one coat of stain we're going to do. All the sides are done. Again, I don't really want to touch it because I don't want to get the staining material, which is a lesson I learned from the first time I did this, where I have fingerprints on it, where I didn't wipe it down before setting it to the side. Of course, I didn't have a workbench or the bench cookies, which really make a huge difference. So at this point, we've sanded these each twice with 120 and 150 grit sandpaper to get our initial finish down. We've applied our pre-stain treatment to raise the grain of the wood. We then sanded again with 220. The wood had a glass smooth finish. It was wonderful. We've applied one coat of stain, which is all we're going to do for this project. And we've got it on all the sides. And a couple things I want to point out. I don't know if this is a byproduct just of this being inexpensive pine, but there is some splotchiness. And I don't know, maybe it's my technique, maybe these are my fault. But I was really hoping that things like this wouldn't happen with that pre-treat. Of course, these lines where the stain didn't take as much, that's just a byproduct of the wood. The grain is really tight, and so it just doesn't absorb as much in. That's fine. I really want to point out that probably the most important thing I've had to help me are these little bench cookies that are under here, which you can't see right now. But previously I had to do one side, let it sit for a day, come back to the other side. We've gotten all 6 sides done in one evening, and they're going to sit here and dry for the next 24 hours. And then we're going to come down, we're going to check the wood out again. We may sand it with the 220 one more time, see if we need to knock any of the grain down. If that happens, we may even apply more stain tomorrow. Otherwise, we will move on to putting on our first coat of our poly finish. So at some point, I did something to put a little bit of a scratch in the wood. And because of that, there's now this line here. Be careful, especially with a soft wood like this pine. Very easy to make marks, and they show up clear as day when you stain. I could sand this back down. I don't mind that one. We'll call it a character mark. Hopefully my daughter won't complain. So yeah, now we're going to let this sit for 24 hours, and then we'll come back and decide if we need to sand it again or if we can move on to our poly finish. Now at this point, these pieces have had more than a day to dry. Just haven't had time to get back to this project. And everything is dry. As things have dried, there's still some splotchiness, but it actually, I think, turned out better than I was hoping it would. For what this is and the fact that it's kind of throwaway furniture, I'm going to be finished with this. But I will tell you, I personally need to keep practicing to improve this technique. I need to try with some better wood to find out if it's the wood or me. A couple things I will point out, though, as these pieces have dried. This is why it's so critical to get the wipe down. You can see the stain is on real heavy here, and it didn't go in. It's very inconsistent, and that's just because I wasn't as careful as I could have been on the edges. Same thing happened on this other side here. So it is what it is. But now, just like when we put the pre-treat on, having done this has raised the wood grain up a little. I want to take and hit this with the 220 grit sandpaper again, just to get it nice and smooth before we move on to putting on the polyacrylic. For this portion of sanding, I don't want the pyramids or the cones. Now you'll notice you can clearly see the swirl marks now in this wood. In fact, this is unexpected, but I believe that us sanding this is going to require that we apply another layer of stain. I'm going to call this a mistake to have done this, but it's a good lesson. So yeah, definitely do not use a random orbital sander once you have applied your colored stain. That's what we learned today. But you sure are learning a lot about how much material this takes off. You know, this is a case where, I'm laughing, this is a case where these videos can be almost as good as a tutorial on what not to do. Never would have thought about that. And you look how much material that took off. But again, this is glass smooth, baby. So looks like we're gonna have to hit this with stain again. Not a big deal. It'll add a little more richness, maybe even take care of some of that splotchiness. I think it's interesting. If you see this line doesn't feel lower. I don't know what's caused that. And I feel some spots like in here. I might try to hit that again real quick. So, another lesson learned, don't keep sanding because it's just going to take more and more material off. One of the things about the final finish is when that gets on here, that's going to fill in these voids and places where there are errors and where the wood's not perfectly level. And then as we sand that down, we're actually sanding the finished material down, so that leads to a little more levelness overall. But yeah, so huge mistake. Definitely do not try to sand this color down. Now granted, I don't know what will happen after we apply the second coat. Maybe it'll come out even nicer, but I should have left well enough alone, moved on with applying my finish coat, and then just been sanding that down, which is what I did on the other pieces. Now I have read other things online that talk about sanding, do your first coat of stain, and then, you know, but this is what it is. Let's look at how much we took off. Remember, this is before, these are the back sides before I sanded. Something else too, I should have started with the back sides. If I had started with the back sides, I would have learned, and then not sanded the fronts, because I don't care about the back sides, obviously the drawer faces. Here's an important lesson. Don't go fast. Ignoring that I made a mistake on this, I was about to start restaining this without sanding, or sorry, without shop backing it first to make sure I got all the dust up. All right, now that we've wiped down and shop backed all the sanding dust off, ready to do our next coat of stain. Now, I'm not going to bother doing the sides or backs on these. I'm actually going to move a little bit more quickly this time. Still going to use my brush instead of wiping off with these rags because I've run out. These are staining pads that are available at Lowe's and Home Depot. You can use these to apply your stain, but they work pretty good to get it off quickly, fairly evenly. And if I use this, I'm less likely to need gloves, which I'm out of. Take our 3-inch brush. What's interesting is that wood really soaked a lot of this new stain up. Now, what's kind of concerning me here is you can kind of see the brush marks. Looks like I didn't get it up fast enough. Well, actually the splotchiness is much worse. Overall, the finish is darker, sure, but now I have whole new concerns about this. And of course the answer is to sand it a little bit. And I've got 220 grit sandpaper. I could hit it by hand, and that might be what I need to do. So overall, I may have made a bad situation worse, but again, you learn from my mistakes and it saves you a step down the road, then that's probably a good thing. I think this time, instead of the brush, I'm actually going to use this thing to apply our stain so we can work it in. Well, I say that actually doesn't seem to work as well. But I gotta hurry because I don't want all that I just put on there to dry. So I don't know what happened. Maybe I didn't use enough liquid. Maybe that's the problem. I let it get too thin, therefore it was able to dry fast. So this time I'm gonna try to keep it a little thicker. Now another thing I've noticed is that with this second coat of stain, you don't have to let it sit as long. The wood, especially after I sanded it, got pretty thirsty pretty quick. Wow. That actually turned out really nice. You noticed I'm still getting excess off here. It's not perfect, but it looks better than the first one. In the second run, makes me also wonder if the splotchiness is due to brush marks or wiping strokes where I wasn't super careful about getting that stuff right. Right here, I know this is a mark where the pad had stopped. That dries awful quick. Makes me think I really should apply another coat to this one and then see how good I can get the stain off. Always double check your stores. Looks like I was wrong and had some more of these clean wipes. So I'm actually gonna quickly, before this totally sets in, and this could be making a bad thing worse, I'm gonna hit the rest of this so that I try to blend it in. And then I'm gonna work very diligently to basically take it off immediately so it doesn't have a chance to get as dark as a third coat. Rubbing back and forth actually seems to work better than drawing it towards me. So that certainly helped a little bit. Now though, unfortunately, this one is a little bit darker than the other. Makes me actually want to hit the other one real quick. And then it looks like everything will end up getting 3 coats of stain, which again, I wasn't originally planning on. But it does, I guess, add a little bit to the richness, sort of. So what started off as an accident, it's kind of looking like it's going to turn out okay. Looks like 3 coats is our answer. So now we let these dry again.